Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is kind of a dark and wet day out there. It's pretty dark outside right now, as you can tell. So I hope everyone's doing good. I The weather's been nice, but this is my second, well, technically my third day of vacation. I go back to school for the summer session or for the summer camps in like another week or so. But other than that, I've been kind of relaxing and doing stuff and just getting some extra practice and watching movies, of course. This weekend we have two quantum shows coming up, so been getting ready for those shows. So yeah, and I just as we speak, I'm uploading my review of a brand new movie that I saw. Uh, I went on Sunday with some friends to go see Bring Her Back, and I'm in the process right now of uploading the video. It should be up any minute or in the next 15 minutes or so. So it's a brand new movie, and without going too much about, without going into too much about that movie, because this is actually today's show is another music show. I've been trying to mix things up. This is actually a show too on a band and an album that I've actually been wanting to talk about for quite a while. It was a really cool way I discovered this album, how I heard about it, and then it was kind of an undertaking to when I finally got the album. So it's kind of a for what it is, I think kind of an interesting story. But yeah, I with this channel, of course, I'm back to watching. I go through this really weird phase all the time. It's really weird. But I don't know. I don't really, I guess I just don't question it anymore. It just feels like, I feel like everything that we kind of experience, like our tastes, things that we, for all relatively open minded to like new experiences and like exploring new artists, checking out new artists, new movies. I'm kind of a somewhat of an obsessive compulsive person, so like when I get into a style of film or if I get into a director or a franchise, I'm kind of a completionist that way. I usually will go all the way till it's like burnt out, But along that way, for that journey, I always feel like I learn a lot about those particular works of art. Whether it's it could be a composer I've been checking out that I like. Like lately, for instance, it's been a couple of weeks, but for a while I'm really into Charles Ives for example, famous kind of modern classical composer. I got turned on his stuff quite a few years ago, and then the last few months I've been kind of taking a deep dive and really getting into a lot of his work. And I'll like go and go and go until like I need a break, kind of a thing, and then I'll eventually come back to it. So I do that a lot with new things that I'm discovering, and different filmmakers. I do kind of do that with everything. I'm a big firm believer in taking deep dives in things that you love, because when I discover an artist, a band, or a filmmaker, or what have you, and if I'm really into it, I want to like check out what were those things that kind of influenced that particular artist. A real recent example of that for me when it comes to film is really lately. I've been really the last year or so. I've become a real big fan of Osgood Perkins, the director and writer. I think he's one of the best filmmakers right now. And there's one of his movies I have not seen, The Black Coat's Daughter, I think is the name of it. And that came out a few years back, and I heard that movie is really awesome, but I have not seen that yet. But I seen Long Legs. I really love that movie. That was the first movie of his that I saw, and I have it. I bought it on Blu-ray. I got a really beautiful edition of that. I've done a couple of videos on that, and I really love The Monkey too, which was The Monkey, which came out this year, 2025. For me, is hands down the best new movie I've seen in the theater. That movie was just awesome, and I just feel like that movie isn't really talked about and was kind of like forgotten about. It was There was a buzz around it, but it feels like no one's talking about that movie anymore, and it didn't really have the, I guess, the traction in media like Longlegs. But fantastic movie. But anyway, he was a new director for me, and I really liked his style. I thought his style was, I don't know, a real interesting kind of combination of like comedic humor, real dark and twisty subject matter, blending, different genres, horror and a little bit of science fiction, and also fantasy and comedy, like I said, and then also like having this kind of modern take on horror, and then also having this influence of, I feel like, grindhouse films, like 70s movies. I see that that's a big influence, I think, in Longlegs, and I think especially in The Monkey. There's some pretty cool like references, I think, to those movies. And he's a big component of using practical effects. So, like, for instance, I discovered him really, within the past year or so as a director, and I've really been enjoying his films, like loving his films. So I started checking out interviews with Osgood Perkins, like just seeing like what makes him tick. What are the things, like what movies influence him? What directors does he love? What movies did he grow up on that he finds as that source of, or that well of inspiration. And then from there, I'll like, oh, okay, maybe there's that movie that I've seen or have seen a couple times, or a plethora of other movies I haven't seen. And then from that point, I'll make a list or try to check out those movies. So that's what I mean by deep dive. I do that a lot. But I do that, and I feel like things are, we live in this, I think in our daily lives, the way we kind of are as people, like there's a cycle to things. And we always kind of cycle through things and then go back to things that we really appreciate and have a deep love for. And I'm kind of, that happens to me, it happens to me all the time. But I always go back to the things I love, classic grindhouse, classic exploitation movies from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Always go back to that. So I'm back to watching a lot more of those films. And there's all these times of where I get so burnt out and tired of big budget Hollywood movies, because I was pretty disappointed with the last movie. Even though it's an A24 movie, I still consider that to be a bigger budget film. And A24, right now is one of the biggest film companies out there. And I think also when it comes to horror films, and then also the other big one would be Blumhouse. Those are the two major companies, I think, that are putting out lots of horror films. And then Shudder is also doing it. But there's, Hulu's doing it. But those are the two major players. And I just get so burnt out. And when I see more than one film, and that's kind of like a bigger budget Hollywood film, I'm just like, oh, I just need a fucking break. And I get tired of it. And then I go back to watching my comfort movies, exploitation movies, horror movies, slasher movies, sex exploitation, or what have you. Weird, just bizarro films, and I'm like, I get the sense of, I can exhale. I'm at home again. It's really funny. But anyway, so I'm uploading the video for Bring Her Back, which will be up today pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again for people who have been really supportive of this channel. Really love that. So yeah, getting into today's topic. So it was probably, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, at least 2 years ago, which is crazy. Time is definitely an illusion, but I would say it was probably about two years ago at least, or more. But there's a podcast YouTube channel that I watch every now and then that's put on by Rick Beato, he's great. He's one of the better YouTube guys out there when it comes to music. It's a music channel. He's a guitar player, but he's also a producer. He's very much in the music industry, and it's a really cool show. I mean, he's a really great interviewer. He's had all kinds of real interesting guests over the years. He's and he does these real kind of interesting takes or critiques, or really focuses on a lot of things that are going on in the world that really affect the modern musician, and then also how the general public accesses music and art. He's done lots of shows on technology that's used in pop music, the emergence of AI, streaming. I mean, you name it. But he also does these shows of where he does lots of interviews with people, and those are usually really great. I haven't watched his show in a little while, but he's really great, and he's also a really great guitar player. But he's a really good interviewer, and I've seen some really great shows with him. So that's kind of how this whole story started. So there's a rock band that I'm a big fan of, and I got into them probably about 10 or 12 years ago, and I have a few of their albums. I have a live somebody that I knew, this I think his name was Ted. He actually used to live here in this house. I have a pretty small house here in Northport, but it's great. And at one point, he actually lived here, this guy Ted, and he used to work at the co-op in Belfast, the Belfast co-op. And super interesting guy. I haven't seen him in years. I think he moved away or something, but I haven't seen him in years. But a super cool guy. And I used to go back, I still go to the Belfast co-op now. It's much different. They've expanded. It's much bigger. But back in the day, I used to go to the co-op all the time. And at one point, my girlfriend at the time had an apartment in Belfast, right in town. And it was literally like 2 feet away from the co-op. So I used to spend a lot of times, on weekends or whatnot, staying over. And I, kind of for a time lived in town. And it was great because the town of Belfast is really cool. It's, it was a lot of, there's some cool bars, great restaurants, and it's a beautiful spot. So like I was kind of living in town for a while, so we go to the co-op a lot. And I met this guy Ted there, and over time, like we just kind of got to know each other. And he worked there. He worked there for quite a few years, but he was a real big, super hardcore music fan. And he was also a musician himself. He played guitar and also like did a bunch of home recording. And he was like a multi instrumentalist. And he would always, and I would go in there and we would just like chat, and shoot the shit and talk about music and all this stuff. And his thing was like he was into rock and jazz and all kinds of music, but he was really, really into prog rock. And he turned me on to some really cool bands. He was really into like King Crimson and bands like Gong and a lot of obscure 70s, late 60s kind of prog rock stuff. A lot of European bands. And one band he got me into is a band called Porcupine Tree, which is a really great band from England. They've been around for quite a few years now, and they're kind of like, kind of similar to King Crimson, of course. One of the seminal bands in the kind of the fusion era in the world. And they were also an English band. So he was really into them, but then he was also into Porcupine Tree, which is, at that time when I first heard of them, like they were relatively new on the scene for the most part. And I remember he was telling me about them, and then one day he gave me this DVD. He burnt me a copy of a live concert of theirs, and it was from like the 90s, I think it was, late 90s or early 2000s. And it's a really great quality DVD, and he gave me a copy of it. and it was a Porcupine Tree live concert, and it's awesome. Like it's really really good, and that really made me a fan. And since then, I bought some of their albums, and I've been a fan of theirs for quite a while. And the stuff they do is definitely proggy. It has the jazz influence. There's a lot of odd meter stuff in it. Also have a very psychedelic kind of sound. They also incorporate a big kind of electronica sound, and they lean at times, like at least on, during this period of their career, they definitely leaned a little bit more on kind of the metal side. So I grew up listening to a lot of Tool, and I still love Tool a lot. So they definitely have a little bit of a Tool sound. They're a little bit more, in comparison to say King Crimson and Porcupine Tree is a little bit, kind of a modern contemporary version of that band, but a little bit maybe more on the heavier, metal side. But they still have those elements, and each album they've put out is very different. But anyway, so there was a Rick Beato show where the lead singer and founder of the band, Steven Wilson, was on that show. And I watched that. It was like an hour interview, and it was one of the greatest interviews that I had ever seen at that time, and I think even now. Really great, insightful interview with Steven Wilson, and I learned a lot about him as an artist. I had no idea. I only knew of him as Steven Wilson being kind of one of the founding members of Porcupine Tree, but I didn't know how extensive his career was. Where he's worked on, he's also a producer and recording engineer, and he's like produced so many artists. He's also recorded so many albums. He's done all kinds of freelance work, and Porcupine Tree was like his main band, but just a highly creative guy. Super fascinating interview because he was talking about kind of the ins and outs of new technology that was coming out. It was the first time I heard about this new technology called, I believe it's Atmos, which is this new kind of way. It's essentially like this new um, way of listening to music, a new kind of technology to for speakers and for like live performance in a home studio. And now that's like a regular thing for a lot of films, and even there are some theaters now that have that kind of configuration. But very interesting. But the coolest thing of the interview was Rick Beato had asked him, "Can you name your favorite album of all time?" And without hesitation, during the interview, Steven Wilson said, "Yeah, I can easily name my favorite album of all time." And he said it's his favorite album of all time is Tangerine Dream's Zeist. And I have this album right here. It's a double album. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. So I was had never heard of this album when I first heard of it. And he said for him it's an album of total immersion. Like he says like he can listen to this album. It's a double album, and he can listen to this album anytime, any place. He said it's such an interesting thing because it's an ambient album. It's pure ambient. It's electronica. It's very experimental, and it's very minimalist. But he said it's such an interesting journey listening to this album for him because on one hand there's like barely anything happening, but yet at the same time there is so much happening and it's so engaging. And he feels like the reason he picked this album as being his number one album of all time is because, well, the amount of times that he's listened to it, but that he felt like every time he puts the records on, he completely is transported to some kind of alien universe, like a total immersion. And he described this album as being just a total like ambient album, super minimalist, super atmospheric, electronica, and very psychedelic. And I'm like, yes, that's an album I need to hear. I need to check out. and he really talked a lot about this album. And Tangerine Dream is a group I've heard about quite a bit over the years. Like they've done lots of soundtracks. I'm very familiar with their music, and I've always loved it. But I never heard their music from the early period of their career. I first heard of Tangerine Dream mainly growing up through movie soundtracks. They did quite a few movie soundtracks, most notably Ridley Scott's Legend. They did the music for that, and that was probably, the first time I'd ever heard any of their music. But they also did Risky Business with Tom Cruise, which is kind of funny. But they did all kinds of work, and I had heard, they had an album called Ricochet, Rubicon, Stratosphere, and Zeist is an album I had never heard of before. And this is a wicked old school album, and it came out in 1972. And it's a double album, and I was like, yes. After this interview, Stephen Wilson, I was sold, and I was like, yep, I am going to get this album. So I went to Bull Moose, I think shortly after I heard the interview. And I went there. I think I got it. I went to the Bull Moose in Waterville, which is about an hour away from here. So I went to the shop, got some movies like I would normally do. And I put in an order. I said, well, can you guys. And I guess this album is, from what I gathered, this album is. I mean, Tangerine Dream is a very big name, especially in the world of electronic music and especially ambient music. A major name. And so. But I guess this album, leading into me trying to buy it and to seek it out, was a pretty obscure album. I had never even heard of this album before. And again, I did not know anything about this album. And so I looked into ordering it through Bull Moose. So I remember I went up there, got some movies, and then I put in an order, and then put in the order, and then they said that it will probably be, a week or two. And at that time, when I put in the order to order this album, Tangerine Dream Iced, I saw that there was a recent re-release or reissue or remastering of this album, and it's a double disc set. There's 2 discs, and there's a lot of music. Each disc is probably roughly about 45 to 50 minutes. And so I was super excited. So, some time went by, a few days went by, and I remember I put in this album, I put in the order it was right around Christmas time. So I knew it would probably take a little bit longer because that's a holiday season, people buying gifts and all that kind of shit. So, but a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks went by, and I'm like, wow, okay. It's been a little while. I was waiting to hear back from they almost will either send you an email or call you or something, text you or whatever when your order's in, and I didn't hear anything. So like 3 weeks went by, and I'm like, okay, and then I think I was in there again. I stopped in at Bull Moose again to buy some other movies, and I asked about the order, and they said that there was a big delay. It was taking longer than they expected, but the order was on the way and blah blah blah. But they said to just more or less hang tight, and we'll get this to you. So I was like, okay. And then finally, like an unbelievable amount of time went by, to where I got really frustrated and kind of aggravated, to where I was just going to cancel my order and get my money back. But I didn't actually get the call and receive this album till about like almost 3 or 4 months. Like it took 3 or 4 months to get this fucking album. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, I couldn't believe it. It was, I know the order, it was going, the order went through the UK, so it was being mailed overseas. But I'm like, what the hell? Like, so it took me like 3 or 4 months to get this album. And I'm like, this is crazy. And it's a CD, and so obviously when I got the album, I was just like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, but I can't wait to listen to it. And I immediately listened to this album, and I have to say it is everything that Steven Wilson said in the interview is so true. This album is such a masterpiece, and again, I never heard this is the remastered version of this album, so I can't like reference what it was like, the original cut, but this version is just it's a masterpiece. I mean, it comes with a really beautiful package, a lot of great photos, really great artwork of the band, and they go into detail about like the production. It's 72, all these cool psychedelic photos. It's it's uh, it's pretty amazing, to say the least. And after I finally got this album, like I spent so much time listening to this collection, and it's absolutely incredible. It's truly a masterwork. I think it's even though I haven't checked out all of the work of Tangerine Dream, I I still feel confident in saying that this is probably the best thing they ever did, and it's immediately at the top of my list of top 5 or top 10 albums ever put out. When it comes to ambient music, especially when it comes to electronic music, it's absolutely stunning, and it's a really interesting combination of sounds of how to describe this album because it really well at face value it does remind me a good way I can describe it, even though it's much more than that. But I think a good way to describe this album is it really reminds me a lot of Pink Floyd's Echoes, which is probably my favorite thing that Pink Floyd has ever done. I have the Blu-ray, they or and I should say Live at Pompeii. That Blu-ray, that concert to me is the best thing they ever did. To me, that's my favorite music that they ever did, and it's just an extraordinary. Very very psychedelic, very ethereal, very trippy, kind of spooky, and I feel like Zeiss is very much in that kind of world, and it came out, more or less around the same period. It's it's got that same kind of vibe, but minus the rock guitars and minus the rock drums. But everything else, Richard Wright, and Pink Floyd, all of those other things, the psychedelic element, the ambient element, the real cinematic vibe that it puts out is totally what this album is about. So I always think of like if I'm describing this album in a nutshell to somebody, it's like Live at Pompeii or Echoes, or Live at Pompeii minus the guitars and rock drums, and there's no vocals. This whole album also there's no vocals. It's purely instrumental. And again, electronic music, ambient music is my favorite style. I love all kinds of music, and this album was made for me. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. It's a masterwork, and it's so interesting. Like the way Steven Wilson described it is, how it's amazing how this album functions and how it works because it's so minimalist, and there's times where there's like barely anything happening, but yet it's so enthralling, and it's like that perfect balance of kind of less is more, but presenting these ideas, these new concepts, these new melodies, and just gently shifting the mood really, really can give you this as a viewer a totally like transcending, you know, experience. And in less qualified hands, the music could be, maybe sound too new agey, or it could be just boring. And my favorite band of all time, Autechre, they're masters of that. Like, where they can just take this really, some of their music can be very complex and especially rhythmic, and there can be lots of things going on. But a lot of their music is super minimalist, and they can do so much with, say, just a few notes. And that really, really is testimony to the genius that they are. And I feel like with Tangerine Dream, that is exactly the same thing for me. It's a masterful body of work, and it's ethereal. It's very psychedelic. You feel like you're on the surface, like you're walking on the in a desert on Mars. It's it's got this like science fiction quality. It's very psychedelic. It's super trippy. It's super surreal. It's also very haunting, and at times kind of frightening. There's elements to this album where it's kind of frightening and kind of dark. And the thing that I love about this album is that it's really raw. It's a really raw album and visceral experience, even though it's very much in a way very relaxing, if you will, to listen to. But it's super raw and it's not polished, and it feels like they went in the studio and just kind of went for it. And it feels like that's what this album is. And again, ambient music, I love all kinds of music, but electronica, ambient music, all that stuff, I feel like is all kind of under the same label, is my favorite style. So yeah, this album I cannot recommend enough. It is absolutely gorgeous and haunting. Very much in step with like a film score. It definitely has this incredible, powerful presence where it really feels like you're in a movie, or you're watching a movie, some kind of 70s like sci-fi movie or something. It's absolutely incredible. And when it comes to the world of ambient music, I mean, of course, like probably my favorite ambient album of all time is Aphex Twin's Ambient Works Part 2 or Volume 2. That would, I have to say, is, and that's also a double disc collection. That's probably my favorite collection of ambient music. But there's so much great ambient music out there when you look at it. Like, I mean, so many masterworks by Brian Eno and things like that. Um, so, and it's a wonderful genre, but I have to say that you know this album, it's a two disc set, Tangerine Dreams, Iced. Cannot recommend it enough. It is truly a transporting or transformative experience like no other. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.